Hi guys, it's Mrs. Bobman, and today we're going to talk about Egypt for just a few minutes. There's a lot to talk about with Egypt. You could get a degree, you could get a PhD, you could spend your life studying Egypt. We're just going to talk about it for a few minutes to get a couple of quick ideas on the Egyptian civilization. So Egypt is one of those four early ancient river civilizations, along with Mesopotamia, India, and China. They formed along the Nile River and over time grew to be very large. Because the Egyptians were really good at keeping records, they were able to manage the flooding of the Nile River. And they used that to their advantage to produce surplus food, to feed the people, and they're able to plan their day-to-day and year-long functions based on the records they kept regarding the weather and how they could produce food and take care of their people. In addition to their record keeping, which is really important, they also are some of the first we see to develop irrigation systems, again, using the Nile River, using the information they've collected, looking at when they need to maybe, supplement the water to their crops because of the lack of water from the Nile, and again, using the information they have to their benefit and problem solving, they create irrigation canals and are able to use the Nile to their advantage. Egyptian history is really, really long. So again, it's one of the oldest civilizations, and it's a place that, of course, we still talk about today. But when we look at ancient civilization history, the history of ancient Egypt, even that is very, very long. I think that we tend to look back and think that it was just a little chunk of time. They built the pyramids and then, that was it. But really, the time that the ancient Egyptian civilization existed is really incredible. And so historians break break Egyptian history rather, into three chunks to break the time up so that we know can sort of focus on the different eras individually, because it is such a large period of time. So the earliest major period is known as the Old Kingdom, and the Old Kingdom is the time in Egypt from approximately 2700 BCE to 2200 BCE, and this is the time that we see. This is when the Great Pyramids at Giza are built, and so this is very early on in Egyptian history. During this time, people who come to be known as pharaohs come to power. The pharaohs are the leaders of ancient Egypt, and there's a lot of very famous pharaohs, but even in addition to the ones there are lots and lots of pharaohs over thousands of years. The term pharaoh means palace or great house, and the people of Egypt believed that their pharaoh was a god. They believed that he was one of the many gods that they worshipped in Egypt, and that he had the power and the authority of one of the gods. And so he was considered divine, and he was very well respected generally. The Egyptians were polytheistic, right? I just said they had lots of gods. In addition to them viewing their leader as a god, they worshipped many, many gods, as opposed to some other belief systems that were monotheistic, meaning they only worshipped one god. The Egyptians were polytheistic. The second era of Egyptian history we call the Middle Kingdom. The Middle Kingdom is the period up until about 1650-ish BCE. And what happens at that time is that Egypt is invaded. Egypt has become very powerful. They again have a lot of resources, and people from the east, from Asia, move towards Egypt in an attempt to take over. And the Hyksos people specifically move in and are able to successfully conquer Egypt during this time. One of the advantages that they have is that they use horse-drawn carriages as part of their war techniques, their battle techniques, and just their transportation in general. But they use the horse-drawn carriage. And at this time in history, the Egyptians have never seen anything like that. They mostly rely on donkeys. And so they're able to very easily be overtaken by these invaders from the east. Now, something that's important to mention is the Egyptians are, even though they're taken over, they observe what the others are doing, right? They take note of the horse-drawn carriages. They take note of some of the weapons and the techniques and some of the technology that the invaders use. And even though they are conquered for quite some time, they ultimately are able to drive out the invaders and using the technology that they've learned from those that moved in on them. So the last section of Egyptian history, the last chunk is called the New Kingdom, and it doesn't come up to modern time. It still is, again, just the last section of what we would consider that early ancient civilization period. The New Kingdom is when the Egyptians really expand their empire. So they've been around by this point for a very long time, but now they're just coming out of a period where they've been invaded, they've been ruled by outside forces, and now they've sort of regained their strength and their power, and they seek to grow their empire, to increase their land, increase their access to resources, and grow as an empire. So they do that really well at the beginning. They become very powerful. They gain a lot of territory. They gain a lot of power and wealth, but because they become so large, it becomes difficult for them to be able to maintain their borders. And so when that starts to happen, there's little pockets that can be, that are vulnerable, that are, outsiders, invaders are able to move in and sort of divide and conquer parts of Egypt because they're just so large and it's difficult for them to maintain their control. So over the course of several hundred years, they're trying to maintain those borders of their empire, but little by little, they lose pieces and they are overtaken by invaders. And eventually, in about 1085 BCE, the era that we call the New Kingdom ends, and Egypt again faces some struggles, and the era that we look at as that ancient civilization time effectively collapses. So, again, Egypt will continue to have history after that, but looking at just the early chunk of time, it's a large period. So just for some reference, when we think about the vastness of the ancient the ancient Egyptian empire, again, they changed in size. Their power sort of rose and fell over the course of this huge period of time. But some things that we think about when we think about Egypt, the pyramids of Giza, and also Cleopatra, who is associated, of course, something we think of when we think of Egypt. And Cleopatra was born approximately 2,400 years after the building of the pyramids. In fact, Cleopatra is not even around in any of these periods that I just talked about, as far as the Old Kingdom, the New Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom. She's not born for a long time still. So we often clump it together. We think of it as a short period in history, but really Egypt has a really rich, long past as one of the earliest civilizations and longest civilizations that still is around, leaves us memories today. So thanks for watching about Egypt, guys. See you later.